Imagine being told that you don't have the freedom to travel wherever you want on holiday for reasons that seem to have no logical basis.
There are a number of countries who are in flagrant breach of international human rights agreements.
Also this week...
I'm in Oman, spending a few days exploring the mountains and the desert.
And later on the Fast Track Travel Clinic, the planet has been opened up by the World Wide Web. But when there's a tangle, it can cost the traveller time and money.
Hello and welcome to Fast Track. I'm Rajan Datar. Now, many of us these days take for granted the luxury of being able to travel wherever you want in the world, as long as you can afford it. Of course, on governmental or political grounds, there may be certain destinations that are out of bounds. But for an increasing number of us, the world is truly becoming our oyster. Unless, that is, you are one of the 40 million people living with HIV. For them, life isn't quite so simple.
Gary Brough loves travelling. He's visited the USA several times, as well as countries like China and Abu Dhabi. But in 1991 he was diagnosed HIV positive and by law banned from these and many other destinations.
I've heard people say that, you know, I wouldn't want to go to a country and visit a country that didn't want to have me there. But frankly, I want to see the world, and I'm interested in different countries and different cultures, and so I don't see why there should be this issue around HIV disclosure in any level, let alone in terms of something as arbitrary as an entry restriction for a country. I'm not some kind of a biological terrorist that's going to go around spreading infection everywhere I go.
Gary's partner has actually been refused entry as a tourist abroad after he's declared his HIV status.
Several years back he applied to go to Australia for a tourist visa, and there were a whole range of questions, and he disclosed his HIV status and was refused the visa for it. I know I've heard similar issues around New Zealand, but he travelled to New Zealand with no problem, so it's a kind of a strange one. I think it does seem to sometimes be a little bit arbitrary as to how the rules and regulations are enforced.
It is a deadly disease and there is no known cure.
It's been almost exactly 30 years since the emergence of the disease into mainstream consciousness. Many countries immediately brought in draconian rules forbidding residence, work permits and short-stay visas to people with HIV. But today, with an estimated 30 to 40 million people living with it, medical experts say there's no reason for bans.
There's no justification at all. HIV has been around for a while now. We know how it's transmitted. We know that you can't catch HIV just from socialising with people or shaking hands or just normal everyday interaction.
I'm in very good health. My immune system is very healthy and fit and strong. I can do anything that anybody would do, really, in terms of my physical abilities. After going on to medication, I became a fitness instructor and a Pilates instructor, so I ended up being fitter post-medication than I ever was before I even had the virus.
According to the latest UN research, 5 countries refuse entry point blank for even short-term stays. Egypt, Iraq, Singapore, the Turks and Caicos Islands and Qatar, which is a problem if you're a football fan looking forward to the 2022 World Cup. Meanwhile, 22 countries deport individuals, apparently, once they discover their HIV-positive status. And 49 nations, including Australia and New Zealand, Russia and Israel, impose some form of restriction on the entry, stay and residence of people living with HIV based on their HIV status.
China lifted its travel ban on visitors living with HIV just before the opening of the Expo in Shanghai last year.
It was a long time coming, but after 22 years, in 2009, the USA lifted all restrictions on travellers with HIV. In 1987, they were banned altogether. So what held up this change of policy?
It required a congressional action in order to undo it. And there had been, proposals and suggestions in place during the ban, suggestions that this was no longer appropriate based on what was known about the science of HIV, the risk of transmission, the means of transmission, as well as the clear emerging stigma that was associated with exclusion.
But many countries, some surprisingly liberal in other respects, still appear to make entry difficult.
I think the difficulty is often that once a country's introduced a ban, it's much harder to repeal it. Because it looks like a reasonable thing to do. It's often quite popular with people who don't understand HIV, and there's still a lot of HIV stigma around.
We contacted a number of embassies for clarification on their rules and regulations on this subject. Most embassies didn't offer a chance to be interviewed, but gave us statements.
Which is a shame, because Australia, a supposedly liberal country, does have restrictions. While New Zealand referred us to their official guidelines,
which state that no tests are required for tourists staying for less than 3 months, but like many other countries, refer to concerns around public health and the potential cost of treatment for visa applicants staying for a longer term.
People who are HIV positive are living for much longer than they ever did before. The price of antiretrovirals have dramatically come down with the use of civil rights groups and government lobbying. So it really isn't the financial drain that the governments will purport it to be.
Singapore likes to project itself to the rest of the world as a moderate and open-minded country. But when it comes to HIV status, that attitude changes dramatically.
I think there is still a huge stigma with respect to HIV/AIDS. People are still afraid of people with HIV and not wanting to, for example, share meals or be served by somebody with HIV.
While many countries may, in the letter of the law, insist there is no discrimination towards HIV-positive tourists, there are ways of shutting the door by proxy, such as banning tourists carrying in medicines used for treatment, which leads to a game of cat and mouse.
When I was travelling to visit friends, I mailed the medication in advance, writing on the package that it was vitamins. That was one of the tips I was given. And on other occasions, I just decanted the medication into a vitamin bottle. And although on various occasions I was searched, they didn't actually go into the toiletry bag and they didn't check. But the anxiety was tremendous, as you can imagine. The fear of being caught, of being arrested and deported, basically, for having lied on the phone.
It shouldn't happen that you have a visa to enter a country and then you're refused at immigration because you're carrying your treatments. I mean, for goodness sakes, it's actually responsible of you to bring your treatments in, because then you are even less of a burden on that country if you're bringing your treatments in with you. And also, we find it's very problematic if people are worried about taking their treatments into a country. They may go on what we call a treatment holiday, and that is actually very bad for you.
What adds to the confusion is different lists vary so much, and official policy can be at odds with individual experiences on arrival at an airport. And that means the bizarre game of cat and mouse reaches a new dimension.
Do you think there is, for a lot of people, a real incentive to basically lie about their status?
Yes. At the bottom line, if you want to visit somewhere, them telling you that you can't come doesn't really make any difference. And certainly my fears around being caught out around medication were decreased immensely after 9/11, when I figured, they're not going to be looking for HIV medication, they're going to be looking for bombs at this point.
And as long as many countries continue to ban HIV-positive travellers, this less than honest approach looks set to continue.
So, have you been the victim of travel restrictions because of your health status? Do you think other countries should follow the example of the USA and China in changing their laws for travellers with HIV? As usual, our address is fasttracktravel@bbc.co.uk. Email us with your story. Right, let's see what else is making news in the world of travel this week.
Airbus this week announced the largest single order of aircraft in aviation history at the Paris Air Show. However, the announcement was overshadowed by a couple of embarrassing incidents involving its aircraft. Gearbox problems prevented one military plane performing an aerial demonstration.
while the wing of an A380 struck an airport building while taxiing. Virgin pilots have voted to go on strike in a dispute over pay. The strike would be the first in the airline's history and was called after year-long pay talks between the airline and unions broke down. Dates for the planned strike have yet to be announced. And British Airways Gold Card members could soon see themselves locked out of the airline's club lounge. Currently, access to facilities is open for all members, even when they're not flying with the airline. But apparently, quite a few members have been making the most of that facility and stocking up with free snacks to boot. Proposed cost-cutting plans by BA may restrict lounge access to passengers actually flying with the airline that day.
Amazing, isn't it? The capacity of Joe Public to find a wily wheeze where they can. Don't go away, because coming up after the break, Simon Calder tells us what to do if an airline refuses to answer an email of complaint. And Karen Bauman heads to Oman to sample life in the desert with the Bedouin.